Welcome to Tales from the Bridge. Richard Morgan's on the show today. Kevin and I sat down with Richard and had a great conversation. He is such a fascinating person, and we talked for a long time, so we couldn't get everything in here. Maybe one day we'll do some sort of extended version of this episode, or we'll just have him back on the show again and talk more, because it was a lot of fun. So thank you, Richard. Listeners, we hope you enjoy this one. All right, let's make our way over to the bridge.
We're very happy to have Richard Morgan with us here today. Richard is the author of 10 published novels, including Altered Carbon, a novel that won the Philip K. Dick Award in 2003, and was made into a popular series on Netflix. Richard expanded the Altered Carbon series to include 2 other books, Broken Angels and Woken Furies. This series follows an antihero protagonist who is a private eye soldier of fortune that slips into different bodies using consciousness uploads and downloads. Richard is also the recipient of the Arthur C. Clarke Award for his book 13, about a genetically engineered protagonist coerced into bounty hunting. In addition to his novels, Richard has worked on video games and graphic novels for the Marvel Universe, and we're so pleased to have you here, Richard. Welcome.
Thank you very much. That's great. Yeah.
So how are you doing?
Yeah, pretty good. Like we were saying before the start, it's that time of year. You know, the days are lengthening. There's more light in the sky. It's nice. I've got a new novel that I'm barreling towards the finish of. So you know, feeling pretty upbeat one way or another. Yeah,
that's great. Yeah, why don't you tell us about that novel?
Yeah, I'm not going to reveal too much because it's been a pet project for a little while. I was writing something else. I was writing a sequel to the last published science fiction novel that I have out called Thin Air. Mm-hmm. And I was writing the sequel to that and I stalled quite a while ago. And I kept trying to restart the bloody thing. And I should have known better because, you know, I know how these things work. But anyway, after flailing around and desperately trying to get it back on track, and I'm like, you know what, just isn't going anywhere. It's not working. And at the same time, I've been having these sort of dream images of something that had nothing to do with, you know, what I was writing at the time. And one day I just sat down and I wrote this piece that was based in the image and wrote it, looked at it, thought, it's a bit rough and ready, but I think we've got something here. And sat down and banged out the first chapter to go. I thought, right, well, that's a prologue. I banged out the first chapter as well. And the more I looked at it, the more I was like, oh, I really like what I can do with this. And I knew within a few hours of having written those segments that this was something I could run with. And I knew within a couple of weeks of just messing around with it, I'm like, yeah, I've got more or less the whole story down here. I know where I'm going with this. I know what I want to achieve.
Is this something new?
Yeah, it's something new. It's a new IP, a new fiction. It's people who've read my stuff will recognize echoes of it from other things I've written, but it's totally fresh. It's a new thing. And and none of the problems I'd had with the sequel to Thin Air were apparent. And I think it's because I started writing the sequel to Thin Air without really thinking about it. I just like, I've got a protagonist, I've got the scenarios, I'm good to go here. And I started writing. And what I've written, I mean, I like what I've written. It's good work, but it doesn't yet have an engine. It doesn't yet have a heart. And I say and what I realized after a while, and again, this is going to sound strange, I think, to people who don't necessarily write, but I just realized that I had no idea what I was writing about. You know, I knew that I was writing scenes, I was writing things happening, but most of what I've written, most of my books, from quite early on, you have a strong sense of what you're trying to achieve. You may not know where the story will go exactly, but you have some sense of what the theme is, what conversation you're trying to have with the reader. And I suddenly realized I didn't. I was like, yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of ideas here. There's a bunch of stuff. I have no clue why I'm writing this. I don't know. And then I realized, of course, I'm writing it because it's easy, because it's a sequel, because I need to produce another book. And those are all the wrong reasons. So,
right. So that was the third in the Black Man series, right? The Gone Machine one. That's the one that you shelved.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very loose series, really. I mean, Black Man and Thin Air don't have a lot in common. They do take place nominally in the same universe, but they're at least a century apart in time scale. This is a very direct sequel to Thin Air, and it will get written. I mean, I've put a blog post up about this on my website. It will get written, but but not right now because I have to work out what it is I'm trying to do with it first. But in the meantime, this one is bombing along. It's really, I'm having a lot of fun writing it. It's really fun and powerful, and I think it has something interesting to say. So yeah, that's where I am at the moment, and hopefully be done in a few weeks with that.
How challenging is it to write a sequel to a book that came out years ago, before the last 4 years when we've had so many changes? Is this one of the challenges?
No, not really. I think, to be honest with you, I know a lot has happened in the last 5 years, but I don't think any of it has come out of left field. I think all the things we're worrying about now were, clear and present dangers. But a while ago, we knew that, Putin was a sociopathic madman, who was nibbling away at the borders of what he perceives as his territory. We knew that Trump was a clear and present danger who wasn't going to go away just because he got booted out. And there's this sort of rise of atavistic populism everywhere. That wasn't new when I wrote. To be honest, it wasn't new when I wrote Thin Air. I mean, Thin Air came out in 2018. We'd had 2 years of Trump and 2 years of Brexit by then. So I don't think anything that's happened since is new. It's not new in the frame. It's stuff that was already, I think, part of the zeitgeist, and it's just things have got worse because there doesn't seem to be anybody in the right in positions of power and influence who's actually thinking straight and going, right, well, we need to do this in order to put the brakes on here. But same as it ever was. I mean, I think that's history. If you look back through through the way things happen geopolitically. So no, that wasn't it. It was and also both these books, Thin Air and Gone Machine, the sequel, they're both set a couple of 100 years from now. So there's no sense of a hangover from what we're going through now. I mean, there are ghosts of the same issues arising. There's the protagonist in the first book, in Thin Air, is dealing with a lot of things that you recognize. You pick up the book and you go, oh wow, 200 years and nothing's changed. But no, it wasn't that. It was just literally, I say, I was like, well, what is this book about? Because the first book, Thin Air, was very, very much about this kind of Death Watch Beetle rot at the heart of the tech bro Mars colony dream. This idea of, we're going to Mars, and the whole sort of Elon Musk enthusiasm thing. And it was really about, well, all right, so let's say we go, and let's say it isn't incredibly difficult to colonize another planet. Well, we all know it will be, but let's assume that it can be done. What then? And so the book Thin Air is about what then, well, what then is that if you don't sort out the problems that you have on Earth, those are going to follow you wherever you go. So you colonize a new planet, but if you will take with you the same dysfunctions and social ills that you had before. And so, yeah, Mars, the Mars colony, no spoilers here, I think, for anyone who knows my work. In Thin Air, the Mars colony is a shithole, and it's full of unexploited workforce and corruption writ large, venal public servants and corporate power run amok. And it was very clear that was my target. Whatever the story was, it was like I wanted to frame that and say, for fuck's sake, guys, the fact that we can get in a rocket and go there doesn't solve any of these problems. And then when I started Gone Machine, I was like, well, I've got the same context. So there's a sort of hangover there's a similar political critique lying around, but you can't really write two books saying the same thing. And so it was like, well, what am I trying to say in this one? And I had no idea. I have no clear sense at all. So that's if you've got the wherewithal to do it, which luckily I do, that's the point at which you bail. You pull the plug. You go, no, that's not this. This ain't it. And I say I've got two very, very sort of long-suffering and lovely editors in New York and London. And they've just been brilliant. They've sort of supported me and let me get on with it. And when I fronted them with the new stuff, they said, oh, well, whatever lights your fire. Go with the thing that is is give that you've got the passion for, obviously. And they've been brilliant. So
That's good to hear. Nice to have that support. And I think you're right. Like we hear from folks who come back and forth to different series, and that seems to be the way of relighting those creative juices. And did I hear you say that this new work could be nearing completion in a few weeks, or did I mishear that?
Oh, I had made a sort of rash promise that I could deliver it by the end of January,
Oh,
and
wow.
that what with Christmas and various other things going on, that was just wasn't going to happen. But I mean, no, I am well into the third act now. We've had the sort of down end of Act Two downturn. We're picking up speed in the third act, and it's really a question, I think, of how much flesh I want to put on the bones of the third act, because in theory, I could get it done in another sort of half dozen chapters. I'm not sure that would serve the story well, so I'm retrenching a little bit. But no, I mean, we're talking weeks, not months.
Wow.
It's imminent. Yeah, well, I say I'm feeling great about it.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Does it have? Can I ask about the new work? Is it the same kind of world? Are we cyberpunk kind of
No, no, it
rough and?
absolutely, no, it absolutely isn't. It's something very retro. I realize what I want. I want to have a look at what's gone wrong, here in the last 20 odd years or less. And I think what's gone wrong is that the civilization that is Western, for want of a better word, has just lost faith in itself. It's lost a coherent understanding of itself and what it stands for. And the problem with that is people get confused. If you don't have clear parameters on, well, this is what we believe, then everything starts to fall apart. And the problem is that even now, I mean, if you go online, you stick your toe in the acid pool, what you find is a huge number of people yelling about what they're against. But you don't hear many people talking about what they're for. And there's that basic failure to understand, values. It's very easy to criticize. Obviously, no society is ever going to be perfect, and things go wrong, and corruption is a fact of human life, and there are always going to be these issues. But that's not helpful, because it's like, and I hear this all the time, oh, this is disgraceful, that's disgraceful, the sort of retrospective tearing apart of everything. Oh, the evils of colonialism. Oh, this, that, and the other. But the point is, it's like, yeah, none of that has to not be true. And obviously, you've got a problem, especially in America, with people who don't want to think about that. They don't like the blemishes of history. But that can still be true. But you can still stand there and say, well, honestly, though, this is not bad. We've made a not bad fist of civilization here. This looks like it's got legs. It looks like, rule of law, democracy, the separated organs of government and powers, so that nobody gets too much of a grip on anything. There's a whole bunch of tech, for want of a better word, in the way that Western civilization works, in the way that Western democracies work. And I don't hear anyone defending that. I don't hear anyone saying, well, I'm in favor of the rule of law. I'm in favor of a democratic accountability within a parliamentary democracy or thereabouts. That's the thing. We all know what we're against, but that's fucking easy. I mean, all slavery bad. Yeah, no shit.
But how do you write a story about that? Like, how does that work its way?
Well, what I'm doing is I'm taking a different time period. I'm really sorry to be sort of anti-spoilery about it, but I don't want to
of
go
course
too
not.
much.
Yeah.
But I'm taking another period of history that's already been, and giving it a gloss. I mean, it won't be that period of history as we know and understand it, but it will. I'm taking that and looking at it, because actually there was a similar failure of belief in that period. There was a similar sense that the civilization had kind of run out of road and didn't know what it stood for anymore, and was falling apart, and falling prey to all these sort of deeper, darker atavisms that live in the human psyche. And I've just taken that and gone, right, well, let's use that as a background from which to look at this idea of civilization and the difference between civilization and for want of a better word, dark atavism, the sort of bring to the darkness in the human soul.
Ever wondered what it takes to make it in the movie business? Peel back the curtain with 4-6 Success Filmmaking. 4-6 Success Filmmaking is where filmmakers share their stories and the secrets.
It's beyond competitive out there.
There have been movies that it's taken me 10 years to get made.
Don't wait to create. You've got to just keep making stuff.
Tune into 4-6 Success Filmmaking for your dose of cinematic realness, direct from the voices that have lived it.
Interesting. No, I'm looking forward to that. We no spoilers here. We're just
no. I'm not going to say it's. I don't want to let. I mean, I'll start. Once the manuscript is done, I'll probably start putting stuff on the website, little excerpts and things. But the thing is, I've done that in the past, and the problem is, if you do it before the book is done, you often end up pissing people off because you show them this thing and they go, "Oh God, I love it! When can I buy it?" And then they may be waiting years before you actually get the bloody thing finished. And so I vowed not to do that anymore. I will no longer post excerpts unless the thing is done, and I know that it's coming soon. I've learned my lesson.
Ties your hands a bit, right? If that's already out in the wild and you can't modify it.
It's just more than anything. It's you don't want to disappoint people. I mean, there's a blog post up at the moment where I'm saying that I don't really think about my audience very much. I don't write with a sense of who the people are who are going to read my book, either in terms of who they are specifically, trying to pander to what they like, but also in the sense of I don't really think about having an audience. The books are all written for me. They're my attempt to make sense of things. And it's a very strange feeling when you suddenly realize that large numbers of people are waiting on your book. And they keep sending you emails going, "Where the fuck is this book, man?" And it's a lovely feel. I mean, it's really nice, but at the same time, it's a bit unnerving because you're like, shit, I've sort of promised to deliver this thing, and right now I can't. So I think, I'm taking a more sanguine approach from now on, and it's like, okay, when it's done, and then I'm prepared to start sort of hinting and dropping little trailers and things. But until it's done, I'm not going to do that anymore because it's counterproductive, I think.
Yeah, and I understand a lot of creative pursuits are kind of non-linear. So setting a deadline and then saying I'm going to hit this is a bit disingenuous sometimes because it's hard to do that.
It is hard. Yes, it is hard. I mean, I think I say it's hard, but that's a bit self-indulgent, really, because the truth of the matter is, if I were in a less fortunate position in my career, and I had a contract to bang out a book a year, and I needed those royalties and I needed the machine to keep turning over in order basically to make rent, I guess I'd fucking do them, But the gift that I was given right back at the start 20 years ago when I first got published was that I became financially independent through the movie deals and so forth, to the extent that I could literally write what I wanted when I wanted. And that is, I'm immensely grateful for that, because that's allowed me to write the books I want to, not the books that we think we can sell a ton of, I mean, I don't think there's much doubt that the smart financial trick would have been to just go on producing Takeshi Kovacs novels till the cows come home, rack up about 12 or 14 of them. That would have been smart, but I wasn't, I got to 3 and I'm like, I'm kind of done with this scenario now. I'd like to look at something else. And that's always the thing. You have to write what you're no, you don't have to. You make a choice, and either you say this is a commercial enterprise and I am concerned to make a living here, and the rest is very secondary. Or you say I'm going to write what I want regardless of what price I pay for that. And that's a much braver stance to take, especially if you don't have a parachute. I'm lucky because I have a parachute. I've been very lucky that other media have sort of come along and backstopped me in a way that I say not many authors get to. I think it's something like 80% of published novelists never get to go full time. There's always a day job because they literally cannot afford to give it up. And I'm I say I'm so fortunate that Altered Carbon came out 2002, and at the end of that year, I quit my day job and was a full-time author as of the beginning of 2003. And yeah, you get accustomed to anything in time, but I still every now and then I stop and look back and go, Christ, you were lucky.
Yeah.
There's
And was that
such
the
great
book sales, or was it the movie rights?
Well, it was a combination of factors. I mean, the movie deal was just a thing of beauty. It really was, because it threw a series of amazingly good luck coincidences. I ended up with a movie deal that was actually specifically bankrolled by Warner Brothers. Now, I mean, most movie options are taken by a production company. And those guys don't usually have any money. They have to go to the majors, to the studios to get the money. So what will usually happen is you'll get an option taken on your book, and it's a nice little piece of change, but it's not money to live on. It's nothing like that. And what had happened here was that, I say, through this amazing chain of coincidence, I was published by guys who had a Hollywood agent. The Hollywood agent happened to be in town and ask what was new. He happened to read Altered Carbon. He happened to also represent a Hollywood screenwriter who he gave the book to. That Hollywood screenwriter happened to be Flavor of the Month with Joel Silver at Silver Pictures. He happened to love the book and go to Joel Silver and say, I want this to be my next movie. Joel Silver then, rings Warner Brothers and said, look, this is the next movie I'm making, and I want you to option it for me. And they go, yeah, all right, here you go.
Simple as that.
That shit doesn't happen, does it? It's insane levels of luck. And the thing is, when Warner Brothers option something, they're not messing about. So, I went from making, from not making any money from writing at all to suddenly having this huge check come crashing through the roof. And yeah, then obviously what happens is, because of the publicity behind that, I get splashed across the British press. I'm not kidding. I knocked my own prime minister. It was Tony Blair at the time. I knocked my own prime minister off the front page of the tabloid press in Scotland, at least. I was there. Scott's prof nets 1 million film deal. It was insane. And then, of course, what happens is people go, oh, right. And so they review the book. And so because the book gets traction, it sells. And I guess that I probably sold a shitload more books because of that than if it had just come out. I got good reviews in the sci-fi press, and that had been about it.
Yeah. Warner Brother, or that deal, then turned into a little bit of time, and then eventually a Netflix series, right? So there's some twists and turns. And can you talk a bit about that?
No. I mean, what happened was Warner Brothers took the option, and I thought, when that happened, and when I saw the check they sent me, I'm like, okay, so they're going to be making this movie pretty bloody soon, because this is an insane amount of money. And but it wasn't. I mean, for 7 years, every 18 months, they sent me a new check. And it was just, I'm like, guys, this is costing you a lot, because it's not a lot of money by their standards. But it was I couldn't believe that they would just keep sending this money out. And of course, after 7 years, I think someone at Warner's finally caught on and went to Silver and said, whoa, hang on, look, what's going on here? And at that point, the option, they didn't renew the option. But I'd had 7 years of that living out of it. And they also optioned another of my books, Market Forces, at the same Warner Brothers level of pay as well. So it was crazy money. 7 years later, that evaporated. And at that point, this was when I found out that Lita Kalogridis had always been a fan of the book, had loved it from the moment it came out. And she'd actually tried to option it early on, but she'd missed the boat. And she apparently went to my Hollywood agent and said, look, when Warner Brothers let it go, because they will, because they don't know what they've got here, they have no idea how to handle this, then ring me up and I will option it, no questions asked, the moment it becomes available again. So she took it under option, and again, as I said, it was a nice piece of change, but it wasn't living money. And then I'm trying to think, that would have happened in like 2011, maybe 12, something like that. And then it took a further 4 years before they set up the deal at Netflix with Skydance and so forth. So the wheels grind very slowly. In the meantime, I was working in the games industry, so that had sort of filled that gap in my my revenue stream. And then of course the Netflix thing burst, and when it burst really, really huge. So yeah, insane luck. I'm insanely lucky, you know.
Well,
Just
I mean, it sounds like it, but also there's an element of making these things happen as well. Luck plus opportunity and preparation meeting together, right? That's what they say is with the Netflix series, you're listed as a consultant on that. Can you
yeah.
talk a bit about what that actually means?
Yeah, I mean, I Lita's a big fan of the book. I mean, she loved the book, and she wanted to bring me in as complete a way as possible right from the start. Now, that said, I have no training in screenwriting. I've done it a bit, but I have no training in it, no qualification. And so her approach was basically, you're an honored guest here, you know, and we would love to know what you think. And so she would consult me all the time. And I mean, in the early stages, the first sort of year or two before the year before the show actually started shooting, she was sending me everything. I mean, she was sending me casting reels, she was sending me scripts, she was sending me ideas for actors to fill the roles. And there was this lovely sense of, we really want to know what you think. But obviously it was tempered with, I mean, I even did a little bit of script work on, you know, she sent me a script and said, I'm not really happy with the way this is looking. Do you want to have a go at fiddling around with it? And I did. But all of this was always tempered with the understanding that you're a guest here, but we're doing the work, you know. And so, you know, if I suggested something, she'd come back and she'd go, that's a really good point, actually. All right, yeah, look, I'm going to go and talk to the writers' room, and we'll see what we can do about that. And you know, and then I would see that get reflected back in later drafts. Other occasions, I'd say something, and she'd go, "Okay, thanks, Richard. That's really interesting." And she'd go away, and that'd be it. You know, I would never hear anything about it again, because obviously she's like, "Yeah, no, we're not doing that." You know, and that's the thing. It's as I said, honored guest, but with the proviso, you know, we're making something here. You, with the greatest respect, don't know how to make this thing we're making. So
Right.
we will be taking your advice with a pinch of, you know, professional salt.
And it looks like there's a pretty large writing team there. I think I saw something like 16 different authors on some of the episodes, or there were a number of credited authors on those.
Yeah, no, I mean, there were a lot of people wrote
Yeah.
on it. I mean, I think the writers' room changed, not entirely, but there was a big change in the writers' room with season 2. So you've got the writers' room, all the names who were in the writers' room for season 1, and then you've got the season 2 people as well, which wasn't a complete change, but it certainly brought in a whole lot new of other new faces, because people move on, you know. And you know, other projects suggest themselves, people step away. So yeah, there were a lot of different people working on it. That is for sure. Yes.
You were quite happy with the series, from what I can tell. Did you watch it and think, oh, I wouldn't have had it look like that, or did it look the way you wanted? Did it feel the way
Oh
you
God,
wanted?
it looks pretty much as if they've been in my head and taken out, you know, what's in there. I mean, I don't think it's any surprise to anyone who reads the book that I'm a huge Blade Runner fan, and you know, so there was that standard sort of cyberpunk thing going on there, and obviously they were mining the same sources when they thought about the art design and so forth. So there are large portions of that show that look exactly the way I imagined it. I mean, absolutely exactly. There are a few that aren't. You know, there's quite a lot of stuff going on in the forest in one episode where Takeshi is off with the, you know, with the Quellists, with the revolutionaries and stuff. So that wasn't anyway in the way that I'd envisaged it. But then again, the interesting thing is that a lot of what was in the show it's mentioned in the book, but it doesn't get a lot of play because it's background. And so one of the other things that I loved seeing was the way that Lita and her crew took things that I had really just mentioned in passing and took them and then extrapolated them, unpacked them, go, right, what can we do with this? I mean, a case in point being Christian Ortega's family, and this fantastic thing where, you know, she puts her grandmother in the body of a gangbanger who's been busted at the police station so that she can take her to Day of the Dead celebrations with the rest of her family. And, you know, there's nothing in the book about that. There's just a mention that Christian Ortega's grandmother was a cop. And, you know, so somebody went, well, wouldn't it be cool if we did this? And my God, yes, it was cool. You know, I saw them shooting those scenes and they are absolutely brilliant. I mean, this guy who has been, he's already playing this hard as nails sort of Russian mafia type gangbanger. And then he snaps into this softly Hispanic accented, abuela, and it's just bloody beautiful. I mean, it's a thing of beauty. It really is. So, again, very often they'd run with things that I hadn't used or thought of, or they'd run with them in directions that I hadn't thought of. And the end result of that was something so beautiful in its own right that you'd feel like a real, you'd feel really churlish to go, oh, well, that's not the way I imagined it. So,
you're right about the world being something that lends itself nicely to kind of the Blade Runner-esque visuals, etc. And you can really take that down a fairly far path, and I think they did in terms of the scenes, and I think they spent a lot of money on this. It was at the time, I think, one of the highest budget shows.
It was maxed out budget. I mean, basically, they went to Netflix. Lita Kalogridis and Skydance as well. They went to Netflix and they pitched this, and Netflix just went, yes, have the money, whatever money you want. And it was insane. I mean, Joel Kinnaman's on record in a few interviews sort of saying, look, this is not TV. This is 10 hours of cinema quality filmmaking, and absolutely I'll tell you, one of the happiest days of my life, outside of basic stuff like birth of my son and, all these kind of things. But one of the happiest days of my life was when they sent me the initial trailer for the show. I don't know if you remember, it's got a Nine Inch Nails soundtrack. This is the beginning. And I watched that. It's like 2 minutes long. I watched it and I'm like, oh my God, all the hairs stood up on the back of my neck. And I'm just like, oh my God, yes, that's it. That's what I'm talking about. And honestly, nothing much that's happened since could, condemn that. I was so pleased with it.
Well, and the visual appeal of the world, I think, also lends itself to different medias. And you've done a graphic novel, or been a part of a graphic novel, Resleeved, Altered Carbon Resleeved. Can you talk a bit of, let's start talking a bit about some of your graphic novel work. So first of all, let's look at the Altered Carbon graphic novel. What's that all about?
Oh, right. No, I mean, that was something that Dynamite came along and they just said, look, we'd like to do some Takeshi Kovacs graphic novels. Are you up for that? Okay. So I agreed to it. But I mean, they again, I was very much an advisor on that. They had their own writers, they hired their own writers, and then they would basically just show me the scripts and let me comment. And I had a really good collaboration with both writers. They were great. I would sort of come in and say, yeah, this is not really science fictional enough. You're going to need something more sophisticated here, or whatever. Or, and they were great. They were really good. They were really collaborative. They really listened. And so what you're getting in those two stories, they're not mine. I didn't write them. But what you're getting is there's a lot of input of mine that's kind of modified the flow of the story and the texture of it, maybe.
Got it. And you've done other graphic novel work too, right? With Marvel?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a skill I acquired because Marvel, this is one of these crazy things about success, right? You have some success and suddenly everybody is mobbing you, trying to give you more. And one of the things that happened because of the Warner Brothers deal and all the big kerfuffle about the book was that an editor at Marvel, Jenny Lee, she read the book, really liked especially the way the female characters were handled. And so she just rings me up one day out of the blue, says, oh, hi, I work for Marvel. Would you like to write some Black Widow stories? And I'm like, I knew nothing about, I wasn't a huge comic book reader when I was a kid. I read a few later on in the 80s because it became fashionable in the 80s, and people were throwing them at me at university and stuff. So I'm like, oh, yeah, absolutely. You're aware that I don't know how to do this. And she's going, no, don't worry, I'll coach you. It's fine. So she sort of coached me through how to produce a comic book script. And didn't take very long, obviously. Because I think if you've done screenwriting of any sort, it's, you just got to get your head around the fact that you've got boxes on a page. So and then they're saying she pitched me Black Widow. And I was listening to her. She explains to me, yes, it's this Russian super spy and she defected to the West and blah, 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 blah. Used to work for the KGB. And I'm like, oh my God, that sounds awesome. And she goes, are you mocking me? And And I'm like, no, I'm not mocking you. It sounds awesome. It sounds great. It sounds like a great character. I could really do some stuff with this. She said, well, we have got other characters. It's not just, that's one I chose, but we have got other stuff. So I go, all right, well, what else have you got? Tell me what else you've got. So she goes, okay, so there's this Ghost Rider character. And I'm like, okay, well, tell me about Ghost Rider. She goes, right, okay, so he's like a stunt motorcycle guy, except he has a flaming skull for a head. And I'm like, right, let's get back to Black Widow. So I'm like, yeah, flaming skull for a head, not doing that. That's it. Of course, the funny thing about it is that I passed on that, and they gave it to what's his name, Garth Ennis instead. And Ennis had this insanely successful run on it, out of which came the Nick Cage movies and the whole thing. Whereas, of course, with me, with Black Widow, it sort of fluttered and died. We got some really good reviews. I got an A minus from Entertainment Weekly, and a lot of people liked it, but it didn't fly at Marvel standard.
So it's not just novels and graphic novels and film, Netflix, video games. How did that start?
Yeah.
How did the video game career start?
In the exact same way as the graphic novel career. I basically one day this guy John Miles, who works for Electronic Arts, or worked for Electronic Arts, he just rings me up and says, oh, listen, I work for Electronic Arts, and we really like Altered Carbon. We love your vision, and we wondered if you'd like to come and do some work for us on a game that we're developing. And of course, I'm like, and I had just started playing video games. I hadn't had time or money to do that before when I was a teacher. And then I suddenly had all this leisure time, and I'd started gaming, and I was like, wow, that's brilliant. And then they just say, we'll pay you to come and write some stuff for this. And I'm like, oh, hell yes, I'm in. And so for a little while, I was a kind of hired gun for EA, where they'd send me to look at projects that had stalled and get me to do my take on what the narrative could be, and build characters up, build scenarios and stuff like that. And again, yeah, fantastic. It's happening in the best possible way. I got invited in.
If we can, I'd just love to just talk about cyberpunk in that world, because you kind of have become a consultant in many ways to other companies, whether it's the graphic novels, games, and then the Netflix series just looks so good. Blade Runner, 1982. But we get so many people saying, no, William Gibson, Neuromancer was the first novel, or one of the first, and that's 1984. And then you've got your John Brunner and your Philip K.
No, and the short stories are Gibson's short stories are even before that,
right? So where does that start where does that start?
I think that, like most of these things, it's retrospective, isn't it? So you look back and you name something. I don't think anyone was talking about cyberpunk when Gibson was publishing his short stories in Omni, late 70s. Cyberpunk became a thing, and it became a thing with the Gibson stories, John Shirley's stuff as well, obviously, Bruce Sterling. There was something in the air, but I think it was a bit like punk, punk rock. Punk rock, again, no one was calling this punk rock when the first band started to pop up and do this stuff. And then retrospectively, you look at it and you go, "Oh, look, it's a movement. It's a new wave. It's a whatever." And then it gets given the name. So yeah, you're absolutely right to call out John Brunner. I mean, John Brunner was doing what you could arguably call cyberpunk a long time before any of that stuff broke. Sheep Look Up, Stand on Zanzibar. There were other antecedents as well. I'm trying to think some of the others. Walter John Tevis, was it? I think there are plenty of books that were leaning in that direction. But I think the point was that what Gibson and Shirley and Sterling did was they took what was lying around in the 80s, or the late 70s anyway, and they bent it into an architecture, if you like. They created a kind of a template. There'd been all this stuff had been washing around. It was all there, and I think they came along and they hammered it into some kind of recognizable shape. And then we were like, okay, we're going to call this cyberpunk. And obviously, once you name something, it's like branding. Once you name something, it's a lot easier to sell it, and you can get people doing it, And certainly that's what happened to me. I mean, I remember stumbling on Gibson's stories in Omni. I would have been in my early teens, and reading stuff like Johnny Mnemonic and Hinterlands, burning chrome, stuff like this. And I knew right then, age about 14, it was like, right, this is what I want to write, because I could recognize this very dark, visceral, human tone to it all, and this refusal to accept that technology in and of itself is an answer, because I think that's all through the golden age of science fiction, and even in resistance to the new wave, you still had a lot of sort of people who were faithful to the whole sort of space opera thing. The hard SF wing, I suppose. There was always this will to believe that technology is it. Technology will save us. And I think the point with cyberpunk was it was the futurist inflection of noir. It was basically saying, no, look in the mirror. There's your problem. Look in the mirror. That's the enemy. You aren't going to solve this just by coming up with a bunch of technological whiz-bang stuff, because all that will happen is humans will map themselves onto that, and they'll behave the same way humans always have. And so cyberpunk felt true in a way that an awful lot of other science fiction of the time didn't. And you'll find mirrors all over my work, because that's it's very, very much a conscious choice there.
And something that I noticed with reading your work too, Richard, is it's a dystopian for some people and it's a utopia for others. It's not, we all don't live in this same terrible place or the same amazing place. It's just like in the mirror now, it's both. And it just depends on where you are.
No, absolutely. And I think this is the crazy thing, because we bandy these words. Well, we bandy this word about dystopian. We don't talk about utopias so much anymore. I think everyone's kind of woken up to the fact that's not a thing. But we talk about dystopia. But the truth of the matter is, I don't kind of feel that what I'm writing is a some super gloomy, plumb the depths, worst case scenario future. I'm just looking around at what I see now.
And we are in the future. We spoke to Joe Haldeman recently, and he just said this is the future. Like, and this I mean, who better to say this than Joe Haldeman, the war vet who started writing over 50 years ago. And he said, it's here now, and this is where we're at. And a lot of us don't want to recognize that. We think the future is still coming, and obviously, and to use the words correctly, of course it is. But that future that we were writing about a long time ago and reading about, that is here.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a way, it's slightly depressing, because you think, you look around at policymakers today and you're like, Jesus Christ, guys, where were you in 1980? Were you not reading Gibson? Could you not see this coming? Yeah. The problem, of course, is that we make very little impact. Writers, especially writers of genre. And it's I find this very frustrating generally when people just don't want to look at that, or they'll read something by me, for example, and they'll see something like that. They'll be shown something like that, and they'll recoil from it and go, "Oh, it's horrible! I don't like it." And it's like, well, I'm sorry, but that's not. I didn't make that up. That's
punk rock. That's punk rock. That's what
as well.
Or cyberpunk. Or cyberpunk, honestly, techno realism. Right?
That's what it all represents, really. That the mirror.
Do you remember? There's a not a very good movie, actually. Although I quite like it. There's a place in my heart for it, even though it's not very good. There's a movie called Year of the Dragon with Mickey Rourke in, and it's about he's a cop fighting crime in Chinatown in New York, I think. It's worth a look. I mean, it's very dated. It look very dated now, but there's a great bit, because he's a Vietnam veteran and he's got a few issues because of that, and he's sitting talking to his father-in-law, who is also his commanding officer or something, and he's saying, you fucking guys, he said, we went through World War II and Korea, and we fucking came home and we fucking fitted in, all right, and it's like, yeah, that's probably accurate in the sense that they weren't given any other choice but to fit in. But I was thinking, yeah, that's the point. All that trauma that was covered up, would have exploded in unexplained deaths, domestic violence, drug addiction, all these things. But they would all have been under the cover. No one would have been looking at it. And now with the Vietnam War, of course, there's this. Every now and then, someone will do a report where they'll say, "Oh, twice as many veterans of the Vietnam War have taken their own lives than actually died in the conflict," and there is this broad understanding of the damage that was done as a result of that. But we're still not really seeing it for the Second World War, for Korea, for all that stuff as well. And I just think it's curious, especially since the First World War does seem to have taken, we do seem to have quite a realistic sense of what the First World War was. We're prepared to accept the horrors of that war. And then for the Second World War, I don't know, there's a sort of squeaky clean job's been done on it. And it is curious. It is curious.
So revisionist history is a pet peeve. Revisionist futurism, I think, sounds like may also be one of your a pet peeve, perhaps. And
no, I'm just a grumpy old man. Come on,
no.
Years old,
I think a lot of people would have a very similar viewpoint to you, Richard. Taking that kind of techno-realistic viewpoint, think about where we're at with AI and large language models. Where do you think this brings us? And like 10 years out,
AI, this is very interesting because it's happened a lot it's happened a lot faster than most people thought it would. I think a few of us were well aware that this was going to be a geometric thing and it would suddenly break, and when it broke, it would break big. But again, with AI, I think what's very interesting about it is it's in a sense, it's like a lot of the technology, the ICT that we've developed in the last sort of two to 3 decades. What I find is that it's showing us ourselves in an increasingly bad light, and that's our fault. We are, there's been all this interesting thing about how AIs are getting programmed to be racist, or at least to be subtly racist, because the way they're programmed, they're programmed by people who have foibles and predilections and prejudices, and those then get fed into the AI as well. So the AI then comes with those pre-installed. And yeah, I think it's interesting because there's a lot of panic, I think, and I do think it's unwarranted panic in a lot of cases. There's a lot of panic about AI, but my feeling is actually the problem here again is not AI. The problem is us, because we'll be the ones who unleash it in places where we really shouldn't. We'll be the ones who don't wake up until it's too late to the damage it does to sort of existing structures. We are already the ones who have sort of contaminated it with our own human perspectives. I'm not sure that there's an easier way to. I mean, in the end, it's always going to be humans that deal with this, right? So it's hard to see how you can avoid these pitfalls. I do think one of the things that's become very unfashionable in the last 20 years, and to be honest, this has been coming since Reagan and Thatcher. It's really an 80s thing. Is there's been this massive rolling back of the idea of the state. So the idea that government should do things. And I say, I don't think it's as bad in Canada or the United Kingdom, but certainly in America, this idea that government is the problem, and so we've gone from space exploration, case in point. We've gone from a thing where the United States was interested in the space program and was prepared to spend a lot of money at NASA building a space program, and we're now in a position where no one will really do it except guys like Elon Musk. And we're just letting, it's like, oh, well, yeah, you do it, and of course, what happens then is as a result of that, you get no fucking oversight, and you get like that public-private partnership where they were supposed to be taking this NASA probe into orbit, and guess what? They fucked up. I mean, and it was like, oh, it's a fantastic, it's the future of space travel. Private enterprise brings home the bacon again. Or not. And I think that whole, one of the things I have a huge respect for is the idea of regulatory cadres. So that is to say that you create organizations that have an ethos, and the people who work in those organizations believe in that ethos, and it matters to them. And so when they do things, they're doing it because of who they are and what they're a part of, rather than they're doing it because it's their job. And I think that's become unfashionable now. I mean, in fact, the only place you really see it spoken of openly, I guess, would be like, with the military, with the American military. Everyone talks about how, these guys, they go into the military, they're not going into it for the money, they're not going into it for the glory, they're doing it because they believe in this ideal of serving. Now that should also be true of enormous number of other public servants. I mean, that should be true of teachers, that should be true of doctors and nurses. That it should be true at all sorts of levels in society. And we are dismantling this apparently as fast as we can go. America being the template, but it's happening elsewhere as well. You see it everywhere. You're certainly seeing it in my country. And that's the problem, because you need oversight. You need people whose primary allegiance is to a code of conduct rather than anything else. And again, we're back now with atavism, aren't we? This whole thing of we've ended up with a situation where people don't actually care about the rules anymore. They just care about winning for their side. So the Trump phenomenon is obviously the most obvious one. It's almost like, as a species, we've had sort of 50, 60 years of behaving sensibly, and and trying to regulate ourselves and our appetites, and then we're bored with it now. It's like, we're kind of fed up with behaving, don't like the rule of law, it's boring. Let's why don't we just go back to what we were doing before? What were we doing before? Well, lots of slaughter, really. And yeah, that's where we are now. I mean, there's the war in Ukraine is a case in point. It's absolutely an atavistic war. It's the war of a man and an ideology that is based on blood. I mean, this is the hilarious thing. I'm not hearing nearly enough commentary along these lines. I think that the Western press is, I don't know what the fuck they're playing at, but Putin is Hitler. It's a direct map. Why is he invading Ukraine? Because the Ukrainians are bloody Russians and they should get with the program. I mean, it's the exact same rhetoric that Hitler used when he was stomping across Europe back in before the dying days of the peace before the Second World War. But I think what's very interesting about it is that it's atavistic. It is this blood. We are Russians, and rather than, well, no, but rule of law says you're not supposed to fucking invade other people's countries. That's out the window now. That's not even that's not even an arguing point, apparently.
It's if you have the power, you can take that power. It's the rule of law is secondary to whether or not you have that power.
Yeah, we're going back to a great states idea of geopolitics, which is and I mean the Chinese have been singing this tune for a while. We're a big country, you're a small country, so shut the fuck up. And unfortunately, again, there is a bulwark against this, because the Western world is not operating according to that principle, at least not on the surface. I mean, again, you can have a long conversation about American foreign policy and what was really going on there, but the point is that the idea of a rules-based order, the idea of the rule of international law, the idea of you don't get to swagger about just because you're big enough. That is a key tenet of how Western civilization is supposed to work, and we've lost faith in it. I don't hear anybody shouting about that. I don't.
It's not cool. It doesn't have a big posse right now. It's
not cool. Exactly. It's not cool. It's not emotive. It's not. A well-run society is actually quite boring, because it's right. A bunch of bureaucrats and people making sure everything runs smoothly. And yeah, it does sometimes feel like, we're bored of that. Why don't we have? And maybe that's what it's going to take. Maybe it will take a generation of horror, of wars and destruction and death and privation, so that we wake up again after it and go, fuck, no, actually, that's a bad idea.
But you said again, right? We already did that.
Well, yeah, we did it. That's the thing. Yeah. You'd have thought that. I mean, it is exactly what's happening. That conflict and everything that came after is now so far back in history that people don't really think about it anymore. You've got all these people who don't believe the Holocaust happened, or they've got only the faintest of ideas of what happened, of who Hitler was, who Churchill was, what was going on. I guess it's inevitable that history shrinks, and
that certain things become so blown out of proportion with our society being so quote unquote terrible, that we must have a populist movement and we must blow things up. And that's
absolutely.
And that's a lack of perspective, in my opinion.
Yes, it's a failure to understand how precious what we've got is, and to understand how easily broken it is. I think there are large numbers of people, especially younger people. I mean, people who were born, in the 90s or after, and they seem to think that a well-ordered, peaceful world in which, you can get stuff done and get on with your life, and live in peace. They seem to think that that is a given. That's a thing. That's just how humans live. And it's like, well, no.
It's a tenuous thing.
To tell you, no, that's not a thing. That's that's a very recent idea. It's an innovation. We've only had it for 50 or 60 years, and it's the failure to value that is what really scares me. Because
I've often thought that if I was going to protest, and I say this tongue in cheek, if I was going to go protest, I'd hold a sign that says, "What do we want? Incremental change. When do we want it? In due course."
That was awesome. Thank you, Richard. Can you imagine if we got Peter Watts and Richard on the show together? Maybe. We'll see what happens down the road. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this episode. We really appreciate you. Until next time.